The American middle class is collapsing. Not someday, not eventually, right now. And it's not happening the way anyone thought it would. There's no stock market crash, no recession making headlines, no emergency press conference, just millions of families quietly drowning in bills that keep going up while their paychecks stay exactly the same. Over the last 3 years, the cost of just staying alive in America has changed in ways that make normal budgeting basically impossible. Utility bills that used to be predictable now come with payment plans and shutoff warnings. Housing that was supposed to give you stability now eats up so much of your income that you can't save anything, you can't move, you can barely breathe. And debt that used to feel like a temporary thing has turned into the only reason some households aren't falling apart completely. This isn't just economic anxiety, it's suffocation. By the middle of 2025, the numbers were telling a story that politicians didn't want to talk about. Household debt hit levels we've never seen before, not because people were spending like crazy, but because what they earn doesn't cover what it costs to live anymore. Savings accounts that people spent years building disappeared in a few months, and the gap between what the economy looks like on paper and what it actually feels like sitting at your kitchen table got wider and wider. What you're about to hear isn't guesswork. It's the real mechanics of how millions of American families are getting financially torn apart. One electric bill, one rent check, one grocery trip at a time. And why it's only getting worse. The price level trap. Why lower inflation doesn't actually help. Here's the thing that trips everyone up about inflation news. When people hear inflation is slowing down, they think that means stuff is getting cheaper. It doesn't. It never did. Inflation measures how fast prices are going up, not whether they're going up or down. So when inflation drops from 9% to 3%, prices aren't falling. They're still climbing, just not as fast. All the damage from when prices shot up earlier, that stays locked in permanently. This matters because you and I don't budget in percentages. We budget in actual dollars. That gallon of milk that jumped from $3.50 to $4.80, it doesn't drop back down just because the rate of increase slowed. That $4.80 becomes the new normal, the new starting point that every family has to deal with. The grocery bills that spiked back in 2022 stayed at that higher level. Rent that pushed people to their breaking point didn't go back down. It just stopped going up as fast. Going out to eat, which used to be something you could do on a weeknight without thinking twice, turned into something you save for special occasions. Everything stayed expensive while the experts celebrated beating inflation. So the official story, and what people are actually living through, completely different. Families would look at the news saying, the economy was getting better, then look at their bank account and feel like they were going crazy. Because nothing got cheaper. Nothing went back to normal. The cost of living just locked in at a level that millions of people can't actually afford. And what makes this trap really brutal is how it all adds up. A 5% increase here, a 7% jump there, spread across your rent, your utilities, your food, your insurance, your healthcare, over 3 years. None of it feels like a disaster by itself, but when you stack it all together, it completely changes how your household budget works. Things you used to think of as extra became things you have to have. Things that felt comfortable got tight. Things that were already tight became impossible. And that's when families hit the point where they have to choose, cut back on everything, put off every purchase, or start borrowing. Once borrowing becomes your only real option, that's when the second phase starts. Utilities. When just keeping the lights on turns into debt. The first place you really feel the squeeze isn't in the stuff you choose to buy. It's in the bills you can't avoid. The ones that show up every single month whether you're ready for them or not. Utilities are right at the top of that list. Electricity, heat, water. Things you absolutely need that used to be boring and predictable. That changed fast. By early 2025, more American families were behind on their utility bills than at any point most people can remember. Payment plans, disconnect notices, late fees. Things that used to be rare emergencies became just another part of life. The numbers show you how big this is. Just in Texas, electric bills averaging $560 in June and $650 in July became normal during the summer heat. Not for mansions, not because people were wasting power, just from trying to keep their house livable when it's brutally hot outside and the cost to run the grid went through the roof. Across the whole country, people falling behind on utilities hit crisis levels. Families got behind not because they wanted to, but because the math just doesn't work. When your bill goes up 40 to 60% and your paycheck stays the same, something's got to give. And here's the thing about utilities. When you can't pay them in full, you pay them first, which means something else has to wait. That's the moment when a basic necessity starts acting like debt. You're not just paying a bill anymore. You're carrying a balance. You're setting up payment arrangements. You're racking up late fees. What used to be just the simple cost of keeping your home running turns into this financial obligation you have to actively manage month after month. You're not budgeting expenses anymore. You're managing what you owe. And it doesn't stop there. When utilities eat up more of what you make, everything else gets squeezed. Medical bills get pushed back. You start using credit cards for groceries. Your rent payment comes in closer and closer to the deadline. Each decision feels temporary when you make it, but together they build this system that's one bad week away from completely breaking down. This is why utility debt matters so much as a warning sign. It's not optional spending. It's not about your lifestyle choices. When millions of people start falling behind on something as basic as electricity, it's telling you something really important. The margin that holds everyday life together is falling apart. And once the essentials turn into something you owe on, debt stops being a choice. It becomes the only way forward. The debt trap, borrowing just to get by. When the basics cost more than what you're bringing in, debt fills that gap. At first, it seems reasonable. Your credit card covers the extra at the grocery store. A small loan takes care of an unexpected car repair. You let a balance roll over to next month thinking you'll catch up soon. Debt looks like a bridge, something temporary that smooths things out until you can get back on track. But what's happening in people's homes right now is completely different. Debt isn't paying for investments or helping families get ahead anymore. It's just maintaining a standard of living that used to be doable with a regular paycheck. People aren't borrowing for their future. They're borrowing just to survive right now. By 2025, total credit card debt in American households went over $1.2 trillion, the highest it's ever been. The average interest rate climbed past 22%, so any balance you carry from month to month is now growing faster than most people can pay it down. A $5,000 balance turns into thousands more in just interest if all you can do is make minimum payments. And here's what the data shows. Almost half of people with credit cards are now using them to pay for essentials. Groceries. The gap in their utility bills, medical bills, car repairs. Not luxuries. Not stuff they don't need. Survival expenses that their income doesn't cover anymore. This changes everything about how debt works in daily life. Your minimum payments keep creeping up as what you owe grows. Interest keeps piling on in the background, quietly, constantly. Late fees show up when your payment comes in even a little behind. What used to feel like flexibility turns into this rigid obligation. More and more of every paycheck is already spoken for before it even hits your account. And the stress shows up in how people act. They start juggling due dates instead of planning a budget. They're doing math in their head about which bill can be current this month and which one can slide without immediate consequences. Paying off one account creates pressure somewhere else. The whole thing holds together until it doesn't. This is how that temporary bridge becomes a permanent trap. When debt replaces actual income growth as your way of keeping up with life, it doesn't give you more options. It takes them away. You miss payments, your credit score drops, your interest rates go even higher. Access to affordable borrowing vanishes right when you need it most. What started as a solution becomes a brand new source of stress. And the most dangerous part? How gradual it all is. There's no single moment where everything falls apart, no breaking point. The household just adjusts, step by step, tighter and tighter limits, narrower and narrower margins. It's only later that you realize the flexibility is completely gone. Debt doesn't destroy a household overnight. It just narrows the path forward until there's no room left to move around. And once that room disappears, even small stuff, missing a shift at work, your paycheck coming a few days late, an unexpected bill, can trigger a real crisis. And that vulnerability gets even worse when you add in the biggest expense most families have: housing. From solid ground to a financial cage. For generations, housing was supposed to be the stable part of your budget. Something predictable enough that you could build everything else around it. A foundation you could count on. That's not how it works anymore. Housing has become one of the biggest drivers of financial pressure in American life. For renters, it's pretty straightforward and brutal. What you pay each month has been going up faster than wages in most places, forcing families to put more and more of their income into just staying where they are. And moving doesn't fix it. Affordable places are hard to find. And when you add up the costs of relocating, you usually don't save anything anyway. Rent stopped feeling like a housing decision. It started feeling like a monthly ransom. The numbers back this up. The median home price hit somewhere between $410,000 and $420,000 across the country. That's almost 6 times what the median household makes. That ratio used to be 3 to 1. It's doubled in one generation, turning home ownership from something you could reasonably work toward into something that needs a lot of luck on top of hard work. Even just renting got crazy expensive. The average one-bedroom apartment costs about $1,500 a month nationwide now. That's 15% higher than before the pandemic. In big cities like New York, San Diego, Boston, Miami, that same apartment easily runs you $2,500 to $3,000. Housing didn't cool off. It just settled into a new normal that's permanently more expensive. Homeowners are dealing with similar pressure, just in a different form. Even if your mortgage payment is locked in and stays the same, the total cost of owning keeps going up. Insurance premiums are surging, property taxes go up every year. Maintenance and repairs cost way more than they did just a few years ago because of higher labor costs and material prices. What used to feel like routine upkeep now hits like a financial shock every time something breaks. Housing pressure messes everything up because of where it sits in your budget. It squeezes from the top down, when a huge chunk of what you make is already going to shelter. There's no wiggle room left to absorb surprises anywhere else. A higher utility bill has nowhere to go. A growing minimum payment on your debt can't be offset by cutting something else. Your savings evaporate. Any flexibility you had just disappears. What looked like stability turns into fragility. This is where housing stops being a foundation and becomes a constraint instead. Families stay housed, but it comes at the cost of constant tension. Every other decision becomes defensive. Plans get put off indefinitely. Long-term goals, the kind that actually build a life, get replaced by just trying to survive month to month. And it goes beyond individual households. When people are locked into housing costs, they can barely handle. They can't move. Mobility freezes up. Changing jobs becomes too risky. Opportunities get passed over because relocating just isn't financially possible. The economy loses its ability to adapt. Households lose their options. and the pressure just keeps building. Housing doesn't have to collapse for life to feel unstable. It just has to eat up enough of what you make that everything else becomes way harder to manage. And when that happens, the next break shows up immediately. Your savings disappear. Savings extinction, living one emergency away from crisis. When housing, utilities, and debt are consuming more and more of your paycheck, the first thing to go is your cushion. Savings don't disappear because people suddenly stop caring about the future. They disappear because there's just nothing left to put away. For millions of families, saving isn't something you do every month anymore. It's something you hope you can do. You tuck some money away when you can. Then you pull it right back out the moment anything unexpected comes up. Car repairs, medical bills, school supplies. Each thing seems manageable on its own, small even. But together, they wipe out whatever progress you'd made. And living without any financial cushion completely changes how life feels every single day. It creates this constant awareness in the back of your mind that any small thing could turn into a serious problem. A missed shift at work, a paycheck that gets delayed, a repair that can't wait. Without savings, these moments force you to make immediate decisions. And those decisions usually mean taking on more debt or letting other payments slide. This is why so many people describe feeling stuck even when they're technically current on all their bills. Being stable isn't about whether you paid everything this month. It's about how close you are to falling behind. When you don't have a reserve, every single month becomes a test of whether you can just endure it, not whether you're making any actual progress. And the emotional weight of that is real. Planning for the future starts to feel ridiculous when the present is demanding every bit of your attention. Long-term goals, buying a home, switching to a better career, starting a family, those get shelved. Not because people don't have ambition, but because the financial ground under their feet feels fundamentally unreliable. This isn't a character flaw. It's not about discipline or willpower. It's a structural outcome. When all the essential costs go up together and your income doesn't keep pace, savings become the release valve. The thing that gets sacrificed so everything else can barely keep functioning. And once that valve runs completely dry, households are operating in a state of permanent vulnerability. When millions of families are living one unexpected expense away from crisis, the effects don't just stay inside those homes. They start showing up in the wider economy in ways people notice way before any official data picks it up. Local economy collapse, the spending freeze nobody's measuring. When household budgets get tight, the impact doesn't show up right away in national reports. It shows up first in all those small transactions that keep communities running. In the local services and small trades that depend on families spending money steadily and predictably. This is where you can see economic stress before it ever makes headlines. All across America, people are putting off work they used to schedule without even thinking about it. Home repairs get pushed back indefinitely. Maintenance gets handled yourself instead of calling someone. Inspections, upgrades, improvements. Everything gets moved into some vague future that never quite arrives. Not because the need went away, because the cost crossed some invisible line where it stopped feeling like something you could manage. For the people who make their living doing that kind of work, the shift is immediate and obvious. Fewer phone calls, longer gaps between jobs, weeks that just feel strangely, uncomfortably quiet. These aren't industries connected to global markets or Wall Street. They run entirely on whether households feel confident about money. When families feel uncertain, these workers feel it first, directly, and then the feedback loop kicks in. When those local workers lose income, they start cutting back too. Fewer dollars move through the community. Small businesses cut hours or let people go. The pressure spreads outward, eventually hitting people who weren't struggling at first. What makes this phase hard to spot is how normal everything looks on the surface. Nothing collapses. Stores stay open. Life goes on. But underneath, the activity is thinning out. The pace is slowing. Conversations shift from planning upgrades to just managing risks. This is why so many people sense something's changing, even when the official indicators still look relatively okay. They see it in their own neighborhood. They hear it from friends who used to stay busy all year. They feel it in themselves, that little hesitation before spending money they used to spend without thinking. Economic weakness doesn't always show up with sirens blaring. Sometimes it just whispers through canceled appointments, empty calendars, and people deciding to handle stuff themselves instead of paying someone else. And when those whispers become widespread enough, they're pointing to something deeper that's forming underneath the surface of everyday life. The two Americas, why markets are up while households are down. Meanwhile, if you're following the news or checking the financial markets, the official story sounds surprisingly good. Markets are strong. Stock indexes keep going up. Economic growth looks solid. From a distance, from that big picture view, the economy looks like it's doing great. But here's the problem. That version of reality is being measured on a completely different scoreboard than the one households are using. Financial markets reward things like corporate efficiency, productivity gains, profit margins. A company that cuts costs, automates processes, or reduces its workforce can see its stock price shoot up, even though fewer people are earning paychecks from that same company. From an investor's point of view, those moves look like strength. From a household's point of view, they're eliminating income and making it harder to find work. This creates a growing gap between how economic success gets defined at the top versus how it's actually experienced on the ground. A strong stock market doesn't guarantee strong households. A lot of times, it's actually hiding growing problems just below the surface. Consumer spending can look high, not because people are making more, but because they're borrowing more. The appearance of economic strength is being held up by credit, not actual cash. And this disconnect really unsettles people who are living through it. When you're told over and over that the economy is thriving, while you personally feel more and more boxed in financially, it creates this deep confusion and mistrust. It feels like your reality is being dismissed, or worse, completely misunderstood. The big aggregate numbers say one thing. Your checking account balance says something totally different. Not everyone's being hit the same way. Higher income families and people who own a lot of assets often stay genuinely protected from these pressures. But the actual lived experience of a big chunk of the population is moving in exactly the opposite direction. And when enough people feel squeezed at the same time, the stability of the whole system starts to weaken. Two separate economies exist right next to each other. One that looks healthy when you're looking from above, another that feels more and more fragile when you're experiencing it from below. The real danger shows up when the distance between those two realities gets too wide. Because what looks perfectly sustainable when you're looking at all the data combined can become deeply unstable at the level of individual households. The convergence, when everything hits at once. And that instability becomes most visible when you realize these separate pressures aren't actually separate at all. They're colliding with each other, creating chain reactions that households can't escape. Each force on its own would be challenging but manageable. Higher utility bills? You could absorb that. Rising housing costs? You could adjust to that. Carrying some debt? That might feel temporary. Even living without much savings could be handled for a while. The crisis isn't any single pressure. It's that they're all happening at the exact same time. When utilities take up more of what you make, there's less room left for housing. When housing takes more, debt fills that gap. As the debt grows, your minimum payments climb. As those payments climb, your savings disappear. And once your savings are gone, even a small, unexpected expense becomes an immediate, full-blown crisis. What looks like a bunch of separate, unrelated problems becomes a chain reaction. each pressure making the others worse. This is what makes daily life feel so exhausting for millions of families right now. They're not solving financial problems one at a time. They're juggling all of them at once. Every financial choice you make has consequences somewhere else in the system. Paying one bill creates pressure on another one. Cutting back in one area forces you to make painful compromises somewhere else. There's no clean solution, no simple fix, just constant trade-offs. And this is also why traditional financial advice rings so completely hollow. Budgeting assumes you have some flexibility. Discipline assumes you have some margin to work with. But when essential expenses are eating up most of your paycheck, there's barely anything left to optimize or adjust. The system stops responding to individual effort the way it's supposed to. At this point, stability itself becomes fragile. Life continues. Bills mostly get paid. But that sense of security that used to define normal middle-class life starts breaking down. Families stop planning for advancement or any real improvement. They're focused entirely on just not making mistakes. The goal shifts in a fundamental way, from trying to get ahead to simply not falling further behind. This isn't a sudden collapse. It's a gradual narrowing of what's actually possible. And when that narrowing hits enough people at the same time, it reshapes what normal life looks like across the entire country. The silent crisis, why nobody sees it coming. None of this feels dramatic while it's actually happening. There's no single moment when daily life suddenly breaks apart. Instead, it just tightens up, gradually, almost so slowly at first that you barely notice. A little less breathing room in your monthly budget. A little more careful checking before you make each purchase. A little more hesitation before spending money that used to feel routine. For a lot of families, the change shows up quietly. Weekends start looking simpler than they used to. Plans keep getting delayed. The way financial security feels starts shifting from something solid to something conditional, from permanent to temporary. Life keeps moving forward. People go to work, bills get paid, but that margin that used to make everything feel stable and manageable, that margin's gotten thinner, noticeably thinner. This is what makes the current moment so hard to diagnose clearly from the outside. It doesn't announce itself as a crisis. It doesn't show up with warning sirens. It just quietly blends into the rhythm of normal, everyday routines. And that's exactly why so many people struggle to put into words what feels different, even though they feel it clearly every single month when they're looking at their finances. The American middle class isn't collapsing in one big dramatic moment. It's being taken apart systematically through pressures converging together that no single household can overcome on their own. If any of this resonates with what you're going through, you should know you're not alone. Millions of families are dealing with this exact same squeeze, and most of them are doing it in silence. Which part of this reality feels closest to your own life? The utility trap, the debt spiral, the housing cage, your savings vanishing? Or just that constant feeling of working harder and harder while somehow still falling further behind? Because recognizing the structure of what's actually happening, seeing the real mechanics clearly, that's the first real step toward understanding why the traditional solutions don't work anymore, and why this crisis is just beginning.